Hi everyone, my name is Isabel. I'm a PhD student in the Machine Learning group at the University of Cambridge. Today I'll be presenting our paper, Multi-disciplinary Fairness Considerations in Machine Learning for Clinical Trials. There's quite a lot of content in this piece of work, so I'll be briefly touching on all of the many topics covered. The goal of this work is to contextualize fairness considerations within machine learning for clinical trials, which as yet has not been explicitly examined. We consider machine learning from several angles: its potential to improve patient welfare and equity, the risks of propagating unfairness and adverse effects when used in clinical trials, and its potential to facilitate the use of adaptive designs in clinical trials, which may be fairer than traditional designs in many cases. An overview of this presentation is that I'll first be going through a quick background on clinical trials and fairness in machine learning. Then I'll be discussing the possible sources of unfairness in clinical trials that we've identified. And finally, I'll discuss the opportunities for machine learning that could mitigate these possible sources of unfairness. A clinical trial is a research study in which participants are allocated to different treatments in order to evaluate safety and efficacy. Clinical trials can be categorized by allocation strategy, which is the mechanism by which patients are allocated to treatment arms. These can be randomized or rule-based. Randomized controlled trials, RCTs, are considered the gold standard for determining causal effects. In an RCT, participants are randomly allocated to either control arms, which can be the standard of care or placebo, or experimental arms. Traditional RCTs are static. Key elements such as sample size or randomization probabilities remain fixed during the course of the trial, with the exception that a trial may be stopped due to significant safety concerns. This may be limiting, as interim analyses may provide enough evidence for stopping the trial earlier for success, lack of efficacy, or skewing allocation towards the most beneficial treatment. In adaptive designs, key trial characteristics, such as allocation probabilities, may be altered during the course of the study based on accumulating data, according to predefined rules. While public interest in adaptive design seems to rise during healthcare crises, uptake in practice has been quite minimal. Common concerns about adaptive design stem from the lack of clarity on the methodology involved in running such trials and applicability of traditional statistical inference methods to interpret trial outcomes. Proposed trials are usually described in a clinical trial protocol, which must be submitted to regulatory bodies and ethics committees for review and approval, varying by country. In discussions of ethical guidelines for clinical trials, a few notable documents have been cited as most influential. However, these documents were all developed in response to specific instances of patient abuse. Consequently, they're not really generalizable. However, Emmanuel et al. Have developed a more general, widely cited framework for the ethical conduct of clinical research. They present seven requirements, which we take guidance from in our work. However, these guidelines do not sufficiently address issues arising from the uptake of novel trial designs or the use of machine learning. In guidelines written specifically for AI or ML in clinical trials, fairness is only mentioned in passing. Researchers in the field of machine learning for healthcare have emphasized the need for explicit guidance and recommendations of minimum fairness standards from regulatory bodies. We hope to contribute to this in our discussion of fairness considerations specifically for clinical trials. The study of fairness in machine learning aims to ensure that machine learning models do not systematically and unfairly discriminate against certain individuals or groups of individuals, typically characterized by certain demographic attributes. Popular notions of fairness in machine learning include statistical group fairness notions, which examine parity of statistical measures across subgroups. These may be the most easily operationalized in practice. However, researchers have found that group fairness notions are often incompatible with one another, making it difficult to select an appropriate definition. And recent work has also found that the use of group fairness violations for model penalties has led to a near universal degradation in model performance along multiple dimensions on clinical tasks. This suggests that group fairness measures are often not an effective solution for handling unfairness in healthcare settings. In individual fairness, the aim is to treat similar individuals similarly regardless of protected attributes. However, it requires the use of a similarity metric on individuals, which is difficult to formalize even in well-studied contexts. Finally, while causal definitions are conceptually closest to legal notions of fairness, there still remains fundamental disagreement about the most applicable concepts of fairness in particular settings. Causal definitions also require strong assumptions on the underlying data-generating mechanism. Since there's no universal technical solution to fairness in machine learning, the path forward is to involve domain experts and affected stakeholders, and to recognize social context and examine each situation holistically. This is what motivates this piece of work, which is to initiate discussions of what fair machine learning for clinical trials should look like. Now I'll discuss possible sources of unfairness to illustrate where further advancement of trial designs and implementation of fair machine learning can contribute towards more ethical clinical research. On the topic of subject participation, women, racial ethnic minorities, and other underserved groups have been historically underrepresented in clinical trials. Understudied groups may receive ineffective or harmful treatments, or even none at all, as well as limited access to hospital care. Underrepresentation also diminishes knowledge generalizability. For example, women experience a notably higher incidence of adverse drug reaction and toxicity than men, but few trials explore sex differences. Unfair underrepresentation may occur during the process of subject selection, recruitment, and enrollment in a clinical trial, arising from explicit exclusion from restricted eligibility criteria or incidental underrepresentation caused by socioeconomic disparities, discriminatory practices, or communication barriers. Unfairness may also arise from the treatment allocation scheme of a trial. A notable ethics issue in clinical trials involves the concept of therapeutic misconception, where individuals believe that the primary goal of a clinical trial is to improve their outcomes, while the true goal of a trial is to produce experimentally validated knowledge, where scientific validity is prioritized over patient outcomes. RCTs typically investigate treatments that show promise in pilot trials, but are usually conducted with a fixed equal allocation ratio, meaning that equal numbers of patients are distributed to a control arm and a treatment arm, therefore not reflecting the preliminary evidence. Adaptive designs, such as adaptive allocation ratios based on treatment successes, may provide a way to improve patient outcomes within clinical trials by optimizing over efficacy while maintaining scientific validity, thereby reducing the impacts of therapeutic misconception. However, adaptive designs may also suffer from their own set of problems. For example, in adaptations involving increased randomization probabilities to effective treatments, investigators may recognize and infer more successful treatment arms, introducing bias. Unfairness can also occur throughout a trial from differing patient risk preferences. Participants may operate with distinct benefit risk preferences, which they may find where they may find varying severity of side effects or consequences to be acceptable given potential benefits. Patient risk preferences also provide insight into the types of treatments patients prefer and the consequences they may tolerate and what they may consider to be meaningful clinical benefit. Elicitation of risk preferences may help with patient recruitment as uncertainties regarding risk prevent them from participating in clinical trials. Many patients also express a strong dislike of randomization, a distrust of researchers, or strong treatment preferences, causing them to refuse participation, which would then negatively impact the generalizability of a study. Patients who agree to randomization but receive a non-preferred treatment might suffer something called resentful demoralization, resulting in poor treatment compliance or dropout, or even a negative placebo effect that compromises study outcomes. In such a case, a preference-based study design might lead to better study outcomes due to improved adherence and could be considered something more individually ethical and equitable. However, abiding by patient preferences can also act as a confounder between the received treatment and the outcome, complicating statistical analyses. Patient heterogeneity is an issue throughout a trial that also affects generalizability. Participants of a clinical trial are often heterogeneous, differing from each other internally, as well as externally differing from the outside population. Patients suffering from the same general conditions may have diverse health characteristics and levels of health risk. Heterogeneity may also be the result of several other factors, including biased subject selection practices or differing patient risk preferences. Patient population drift, where the characteristics of the trial participant population change over time, may arise with continuous patient recruitment or trial expansion to different participant populations. Heterogeneity may impact the internal validity of a trial. If the treatment effect varies across subgroups, its estimate is only meaningful for a well-defined population and can be misleading for differing individuals. Heterogeneity of health risk may also cause some patients to be unknowingly and unfairly susceptible to greater adverse effects of treatment within the trial. In an adaptive design, patients who enroll at different times may experience changed trial characteristics. Participants may also be subject to trial modifications based upon preceding patients who had different health characteristics. Heterogeneity may also lead to problems with external validity of trial, such that the trial results may not apply to the general population due to the specific characteristics of the trial participants. This negatively impacts not only the scientific validity of a trial by providing misleading results, but can also propagate health disparities as the impact of treatments on certain subgroups remains underexplored. Now I'll discuss the opportunities for machine learning to mitigate sources of unfairness that we have identified in clinical trials. A large portion of machine learning research for clinical trials has focused on two problem settings within subject selection. One, evaluation of eligibility criteria, and two, patient identification for clinical research or trial matching. Recent work has sought to use EHR data to evaluate and broaden overly restrictive trial criteria that would increase the suitable patient population without sacrificing trial efficacy. In future work, this could potentially improve fairness by exposing whether certain subpopulations were made unjustifiably ineligible. Machine learning methods have also been investigated for automated subject selection. Researchers have used machine learning to identify patients eligible for clinical trials from EHR data through matching of patient characteristics with trial criteria or existing trial participants. Some research focuses on phenotyping algorithms, which aim to categorize patients based on health outcomes or disease states as an intermediary to patient trial matching. Future work should focus upon developments to patient identification, phenotyping, and trial matching algorithms to improve not only performance, but also fairness, explainability, and privacy. We caution care in the use of EHR data as it suffers from multiple sources of bias, including sampling bias, where certain subgroups are over or underrepresented in the data, label bias, where outcome variables have different meanings across subgroups, and feature bias, where predictor variables have different meanings across subgroups. As interest and adoption of machine learning for efficient subject selection grows, researchers must assess their methods for sources of potential bias on all fronts, including problem selection, data collection, and model development. In the economics and psychology literature, preference elicitation is used to measure and evaluate the attitude of individuals regarding risk. Revealed preference methods rely on behavioral data, and stated preference methods are survey-based and are more common for elicitation of health risk preferences. Researchers found that patients' reported preferences versus true preferences of treatment options can be affected by elicitation methodology, such as different framing of the same information. In the machine learning literature, some risk elicitation methods seek to correct stated preferences to more closely mimic unobserved, revealed preferences. Such software based solutions must also consider aspects of human computer interaction, as stated preferences can be affected by interface design. Elicited risk benefit preferences may be used in different ways to support ethical treatment. Trial designs that incorporate patient risk preferences into the treatment allocation mechanism have been proposed. Future work may also address how preference based fairness occurs in multi-arm Bennett models, and also incorporate specific risk preferences in online treatment allocation. In the 1930s, Thompson sampling was first proposed as a solution to patient treatment allocation in clinical trials. It is a solution strategy to the multi-arm bandit problem, where an agent trades off exploration, which is the acquisition of new information, with exploitation, which are optimal decisions based on existing knowledge. Although bandit models seem to be a very suitable solution to clinical trials allocation methods, there has been significant hesitance to use them. Concerns include loss of statistical power, challenges of statistical analysis on bandit outcomes, as well as practical barriers to implementation. Recent work seeks to innovate on bandit models for adaptive designs, including work to improve statistical power, adjustments to existing statistical tests, and methods for treatment effect estimation for adaptive schemes. Future work may focus on improved sequential multi-arm bandit or treatment allocation methods that maintain required statistical guarantees under adaptive changes, incorporate fairness considerations or patient heterogeneity, and handle or mitigate the impact of patient time trends. Recent work has sought to characterize fairness and explore exploit methods such as multi-arm bandits or reinforcement learning from three general perspectives, including meritocratic fairness, where a worse arm should never have a higher chance of being selected over a better one, individual fairness, where similar arms should be treated similarly, and also constraints on the proportions in which arms should be pulled. However, the nature of the explore-exploit trade-off leads to unaddressed fairness implications for clinical trials, namely that certain subgroups may be subject to a greater burden of exploration, where they bear the negative consequences of exploration disproportionately. Particularly in the clinical setting, exploration is at odds with the therapeutic obligation to treat patients as optimally as possible. There has been comparatively sparse research on this important conception of fairness. Finally, patient heterogeneity may result in heterogeneity of treatment effects, where treatment effects vary across individuals. Machine learning could be incorporated into heterogeneity of treatment effects analysis, which is used to estimate causal effect for certain treatments on an individual level. Machine learning may also be used to identify heterogeneity pre and post trial, assess generalizability, and to aid with generalization once heterogeneity is exposed. It can also be used for identification of dataset drift, automation of dataset drift correction, and advancements in driven by advancements in continual learning. Overly generalized models, however, may not be clinically useful, and practitioners should instead focus on developing replicable processes. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope I've outlined well the various causes of unfairness in clinical trials and the possibilities for careful involvement of machine learning to mitigate such problems without creating new ones. Please feel free to leave any questions.